All right, everybody. So today here I'm with Trey from Telosbound. Now, longtime followers of my channel will know that he's been around since its inception. Today we're gonna start off the conversation talking about his book Offices, and then we'll just kind of see where it goes from there. It's not really gonna be an interview; it's just gonna be kind of something more casual. So yeah,
Yeah.
Trey, you just want to give us an introduction? Tell us about yourself.
Well, I don't know, many of your followers probably don't know, but Gabriel Sprock was sort of a telos bound um, idea, sort of. It wasn't my idea, it was your idea, obviously. But ever since I started telos bound, Gabriel has been there. And we basically, I guess we started at the same time, right? You started your
Yeah,
YouTube because that was sort of the plan about everything, and everything just sort of lined up perfectly that Gabriel was ready to start putting out videos at the same time I did. I guess we could sort of talk, maybe we could even talk about the future of your channel because I don't even know what your plans are really. But we could do that after, I guess. Just an introduction to me. I am the main where I run the YouTube channel Telosbound and the Telosbound Discord, and I have my Instagram account and the association now, and we're doing the Baptizing Philosophy project, which is just really starting in probably in the next week or two. Just waiting on getting the promotional video together. But recently I published my second edition of my first book, Aphasis. Um, you can pronounce it however you want. I sort of just took the pronunciation that Chad Haag used, which is aphasis. And so the whole purpose of this book essentially is to take a definition of subjectivity, the subject, and basically I'm pretty open about taking a Zizekian view of the subject and going through a sort of analysis and dialectical movement of the subject itself until we get to the point where it negates itself, or at least points towards the possibility of self-transcendence and the possibility of communion with God. Um, and that is really how I got introduced to Orthodoxy and to Orthodox theology. My moment of conversion actually had to do with and occurred while I was thinking about problems with the subject and my inability to write a final chapter, which would perhaps provide a basic map and even solution to what I call the impossibilities of subjectivity. So, just one I guess the one thing I'll add is, about the impossibilities of subjectivity. The crucial point is that these 3 impossibilities are also what the subject fundamentally is. So, the first impossibility I come to is the impossibility of self-knowledge. This has to do with the problem of perspectivity. You being what you are, you can't step behind yourself to grasp what you are and totalize yourself, because this act of totalization implies an alienation from, stepping back from what it is that is totalizing. But the subject is the being which totalizes. The subject is the totality, and as such, it cannot reconcile with itself as a consistent totality. Self-reference sort of runs into these sort of paradoxes. The second impossibility is the impossibility of truly knowing others. You have your universal I, and you can never encounter your I. Your I can never encounter another I. There's an absolute singularity there, sort of a disconnect, a division between oneself and the other, which means whenever you encounter other people, you have to mediate these people within your horizon of subjectivity so that you are not undermined as a universal subject. And then the third impossibility is the impossibility of absolute knowing, or the impossibility of absolute knowledge. This has to do with the inability for the subject to reconcile with itself as a finite being. It's always able to negate itself further. It is always this act of negating itself. And actually, a good example you can to think this through with is understanding time and subjectivity as homologous, as having the same structure. Just as a present moment, anytime you try to grasp the present moment, you've already lost it. It's negated itself. This is the flow of time. There is sort of a flow of the subject, a flow of yourself, so that whenever you try to grasp yourself, it invariably becomes nothing, or it becomes some sort of memory that is alienated from what you are. So really the fundamental problem in all of this is an inability to know who we are, an inability, and which results in an inability to reconcile with oneself and to reconcile with others. So the subject is, in a sense, filled with these paradoxes and limitations. But what's important to note is that all three impossibilities can be inverted into the three essential elements of subjectivity. So we say it's impossible to know yourself, but nonetheless, we think of the subject as the being which knows itself. We say that it's impossible to know others, nonetheless, an imminent possibility of subjectivity is the possibility of knowing and communicating with others. And the third impossibility, the impossibility of absolute knowing, this can be inverted, and we can say an essential element of the subject is identity over time. So there has to be at least some form of persistence of identity in whatever way you want to conceptualize this. So that's all to say the subject is a contradictory being, but nonetheless, these contradictions can be inverted into the three essential elements of subjectivity. So it's not only that these are random paradoxes, but the subject literally fails to be itself. What we are deep down at our core is not what we truly are, or at least what we ought to be, given the teleological structure of the world, which I think you can catch a glimpse at when you start looking into what the subject actually is. So that's basically a very roundabout way of saying that this is my book of Aces. That is basically the essence of the book, and I work through different ideas all throughout it. It's about 160 pages long on paperback, so there'll be a link to that in the description if anyone watching wants to check it out. But yeah,
Yeah, so I remember like I read there's just for people who don't know, there is a new edition out, right? Well, like the final completed edition, I
yeah.
guess would be a better way of putting it. I haven't read that one. I read the original copy, and I guess like what is like what how do they differ? Is there a big distinction there that people should know? Like I mean that have read the first copy or
I think the only difference is the second copy is, or like the new edition is more like, I wouldn't say I wouldn't equate it with propaganda, but it's more like I am writing these previous chapters that I no longer agree with. I am writing them in order to fulfill their purpose, which is to bring us to orthodoxy, to bring us to theology. So I'm sort of writing, I'm more precise with my language, I'm more consistent with my language, and I'm trying to, and I also introduced the connection between subjectivity and time, because if you understand what I'm trying to do with the subject, I'm trying to think the Zizekian subject as hell. And it's not like a metaphor or anything, but I literally think Zizek provides the formulas and the structure um, of hell itself. And that is why you find similarities all throughout it with Lewis, with Florensky. It's what Seraphim Hamilton naturally found himself at. I talked with him about this view of hell and time just a few days ago. So this is how I'm trying to understand the subject now. I'm trying to understand the subject as the abyss of hell. And I would say that the process of writing a Aphasis the second time around was making it more um, making it more of a direct line from that to the quote unquote solution. I mean, it is a solution, but it's only just the beginning. It's what is the subject of self-relating negativity, but it doesn't actually answer the question of what is the subject actually? What are we looking for here? And that's when we get to questions of personhood and ontology, and really stuff that I need to become better, more well read on. And that's why you're going to be seeing a change in my channel content, the type of content I'm making. I'm going to stop focusing as much on philosophy, and I'm going to turn more to theology, and I'm going to start the Baptizing Philosophy podcast and all this stuff, because that's really where I want to take my channel. It's not just about philosophy anymore, but it's philosophy in subservience to a higher goal, which is orthodoxy, and um, bringing Orthodox theology into dialogue with modern philosophy, ultimately to show not only it's not like some basic like lukewarm idea that like, oh look, philosophy has some good stuff, theology has good stuff, but more specifically, that whatever good philosophy has, Orthodoxy already has it, and we can explicate that in a very systematic and rigorous and non-arbitrary way. So that's really the goal with baptizing philosophy.
Yeah, and I think this is something you said I've heard you say before, and I actually thought it was really interesting. And it's something I think about a lot. Is that there was an original baptizing philosophy with the church fathers when in relation to Greek philosophy and
Mhm.
the Hellenic world. So I guess you could say like what you're doing is that again, but for modern philosophy. Would that be accurate? Would you say?
Well, that's like I think I'm embodying the same spirit. I think it's
Right.
essentially a spirit that is introduced into the world by Christ himself. Christ talks about how the nations will be brought into Israel, which in context means the nations will be brought into the church. The Gentiles will be brought into the church. And I think that part of the new covenant is this universal recreation of mankind so that we're not merely disconnected from our ancestors or disconnected from past um in the context of philosophy, we're not just disconnected from the ancient philosophers of antiquity, but we can show what things they got right, why they got them right. And I even think you can show, given the trajectory of philosophy, you can even show historical parallels between certain philosophers and the patriarchs and their relation to the covenants. I think that history is covenantal, and part of the covenant of Christ is this universal kingship of Christ, which involves the subjection of the world to the church. And it's the church is the instrument and the essence of the salvation of and the glorification of creation. So in the context of philosophy, we are bringing philosophy into the church. It's not like vice versa. There is a primacy of theology and the church here. So I think there is definitely parallels between what even someone like St. Paul was doing with arguing with Greek philosophers and even using philosophical ideas like John does it as well. We call the word the logos. There is actual meaning to that word that isn't just separated from its cultural and philosophical even context. And I think the same thing we can say with, for example, my usage of the Zizekian subject as the abyss of hell. I think that something revealed by the communal ontology of found in its fullness in the Orthodox Church is that to separate yourself from communion is to enter into a mode defined by self-relation. Self-relation is nothing. It is nothing more than the very act of attempting to self-relate, and that is the will turning against the good, against nature. That is the essence of all evil. It's not a substance, it is a thing you can engage in, which will eventually reach an end. And now the end that I want to say is not I'm not a universalist. I'm not This is actually a mistake I think St. Gregory of Nyssa made when he was talking about the end of evil and what that means in terms of universal salvation. He says that evil will just end. He's like, goodness is infinite, evil is finite. So eventually evil will exhaust itself and everything will be good. But what he doesn't account for is fundamentally it's freedom. It's the ability for a subject to say, despite me not having anything, all I'm going to do is affirm myself for eternity. And I'm not going to know anyone. I'm going to sever myself from everyone every single time I'm given the opportunity to commune, to do what is right fundamentally. I'm going to turn away from that and choose myself and choose my own ego. And the abyss of this is hell. It literally is hell. It's a present and current danger for everyone. And I think that's something that you can introduce into philosophy in a way that isn't just arbitrary. And stuff like that can wake people up to the reality of Christ in a way that I think is does have parallels in the ancient church. So that's what I'll say about that.
Right, yeah, so I that makes sense. So the inability to recognize others would also, by extension, it also mean inability to recognize God. And
Yes.
with that would come the turn toward man, which would in a sense be hell on almost like a
Hmm.
an epistemological hell in a way. If all you think you can know is yourself, and you have this flawed framework, and then you'd have to, yeah, I see what you're saying. You'd have to kind of work your way out of that.
And what's
Um,
important about like what you said with it being epistemological, I think that's a term that can be misunderstood, but I do agree that this is an epistemological problem in a sense. It's not ontological. Like, yes, it's ontologically true that you're epistemologically fallen, but what we're saying is that you ontologically, you are not self-relation. You can think you are and lead yourself into all of these different problems, which ultimately ends in hell. But fundamentally, what you are is communion. So the reason why we have hell is the only reason we can have it is because self-relation isn't real. It's because what hell is the point where the objective reality of there being no such thing as self-relation, of there only being communion, this is fully present to the subject in hell. But what makes it hell is that this subject turns away from the objective truth, but it's not turning into anywhere else but its own self. The this is what it means to be actualized as self-relating negativity. You turn away from communion into yourself, but there is no space to turn in. You're immediately confronted with the truth of communion, but this constant confrontation with objective reality. So you have subjective will, objective nature, or objective reality and subjectivity. They're in constant tension, and hell is the sliver within this tension. It's where objective reality and subjective imagination collide. That's what hell is. And I think that once you understand this, then you understand that it's not like, as you were saying, it's epistemological. It's the problem with the subject not choosing God. It's not like an ontological stain in God's creation, because all creation, all being is good fundamentally. It's just how it's used.
right. Yeah. And actually, this reminds me, speaking of hell, I remember a video that you put out. It's something Zizek and Gehenna, I think it was
Yeah.
something along those lines.
Mhm.
And you're talking about, I think you were talking about time in that video, and you're saying that the periods in between time, like what marks the periods in between time, is the reception of love from God. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, that's
Now,
that is like it's from God and also from other human beings in a sense. I really haven't worked at the details, but yeah, you're right. It's like on a cosmic scale, the time itself, objective reality of our universe's time, is the interval of waiting for us to enter into the eternity of God, which is the eschaton. That's what objective time is. Phenomenologically, our time has to do with our communion with the world around us. The goal, I think, is for our phenomenological time to link itself with objective time, to commune with the objective time of God, so that there is a what's it called, synergistic relationship between our phenomenological time and objective time. So we're essentially on the same page. That's what it means um, to align yourself with God in terms of the experience of time.
right. And then, so in heaven, but this is my question, I guess, because, and then correct me if I'm misunderstanding what you made in that video, but if there is a time, now you did say there was a time in heaven, correct? Just before I
There
can,
there is time in heaven, but it's not any sort of time we could understand. It's time that has become fully actualized. It,
right.
it's it's full communion. There is no interval of waiting between acts of love, between persons um moving towards the other person. There's a full mutual interiority.
Yes, that's what I was going to ask you, because that's why I got confused. I was like, well, wait a minute, if you're in full communion and you're the closest you could possibly get with God, well, then there could not be any time of waiting. So, but I guess what you're saying, it's what I believe Saint Maximus described as like this this like
Ever moving
et-
rest.
yes, that, yeah, exactly. So I guess it's like it's not contradictory, but it's more so like a paradox in a sense, which
I
on its
think
face,
I think, sorry to interrupt, but I think it's a paradox on the same level as the Trinity. It's not, it's less of a paradox, more of an antinomy, and there is no actual antinomy in God. This has to do with our fallen reason. So the antinomy of the Trinity is you have one, and nonetheless you have many. We can translate this to rest. God is perfectly one, restful in himself. He's immobile, we can even say, in his essence, and yet he's many. There is a communion of persons within God himself. God is both one and many. And I think that um the fundamentally antinomies sort of get down to an inability to conceive one in the many and to think about how the one can be one in being many and how the many can be one in being or the many can be many in being one. There is a sort of there's a necessarily trinitarian structure to everything, and there's an antinomic um ex we experience lots of things as antinomic because of our fallenness, but really what I'm trying to say there is that yes, it's a paradox and an antinomy, but it's fundamentally a it has to do with the life of God himself. It's us not being able to understand how you can be at perfect rest, not needing anything, and yet nonetheless in perfect movement. It's because our rest or our we can even say our telos, our purpose, what we're moving towards, our end, is endless creativity. This is sort of this is where the antinomy is. Our end, yes, it's our end, but the very end that we're seeking is endless creativity. That's an antinomy. That's what it means for heaven and the eternity of God to be an ever moving rest.
Right. And I guess so. What would you say the distinction between antinomy and paradox is? Is it would you say paradox is more proper to the fallen world of human reason and all that, and antinomy kind of transcends that at a higher level, or
Well, I don't know exactly. I mean, like most people don't see paradoxes as just straight up contradictions, right? They
yeah.
could be, but antinomies aren't just straight up contradictions. Like we're not saying that God is one and three in the sense that God is one person and he is also three persons. That's just a straight up contradiction. What we're saying is person, well, when you really get down to it, it's that person only manifests or nature is only manifested as a person. So you never just have pure nature, you have nature that is in hypothesized nature that manifests as person. And this is really a difficult question, and I want to avoid saying anything that I don't really know about. But from the way I understand it, the nature of God it just can't be separated from his personhood. That doesn't mean nature is personhood, so it's not a contradiction. It has to do with stuff that we cannot understand. It has to do with distinctions we can't really grasp. But I think there is a way to explain in a coherent framework why something is an antinomy. Logically speaking, an ever moving rest is not a logical contradiction. It's an antinomy which we can situate within a framework and say, well, it's an antinomy. We don't fully understand it. But the reason why we don't understand it, we know that reason. But if it's just if it's just a contradiction where it's like, we don't have any sort of language which could capture what it is at all, we can't just accept that because that points to it actually being nothing. It points to it being an error on our parts and not a sublime antinomy that points to God. It actually just points to our own selves and the nothingness out of which we were created. So there, you need to be careful about the difference between contradiction and antinomy. Now, the difference between paradox and antinomy, I don't really know. They may be just the same thing. The only difference is when I use antinomy, want to be clear that there are no antinomies in the logos in God. These are expressions of our fallenness. They are not eternal and they're entirely contingent. Um, and that's the essence of antinomy. It's not necessary, and it has to do with our own finitude.
Right, because once again, antinomy is also, it's an epistemological issue, which we just kind of talked about before. That um, this problem that you're describing is more so epistemological before it is ontological.
Yeah.
Even though ontology is involved, but it's more so an epistemological issue.
Hmm.
Now, I also think what's important to notice is when you're making that you're saying uh, there's no separate there's no separation of nature and person here. Like this is I think a point that a lot of people miss is that yeah, these two things are united, but they're distinct.
Hmm.
Um, that's a key understanding that's going to inform a lot of anyone's comprehension of personhood or any of that stuff. And just actually, I would even say the same thing goes for objects. Like if we just want to speak of essences, there is a distinction between the essence of a thing and its instantiation. Um, Now, moving on from that, I actually want to talk about more about the idealist reasoning,
Sure.
or And I remember when I first read your book, and I don't know if this is different now that you've rewritten some of the stuff. And I believe this is what you said. I'll correct me if I'm wrong if I'm putting my own stuff into it, but it seemed one of the reasons why one of the reasons subjectivity is impossible would be because of what it means to be a subject. And a subject obviously presupposes a subject object distinction because you could say one of the essential parts of a subject is the grasping of objects. And it needs that distinction in order for it to have its existence, I would say. And if the objects that the subject grasps are fundamentally just a actualization of one's own subjectivity, and it's sort of illusory in a way. If we just stick with these subjective epistemological framework, well, then you don't really have a real subjectivity because that distinction is nominal. It's not an actual. The distinction of objects from the subject would be a nominal distinction, not an actual distinction in reality. Was that also? Would you say that's somewhat associated with the impossibility of subjectivity?
Yeah, I think so. But I would say that I think what I would say would have said at that time is that the subject isn't just a nominal distinction because of its self-reference, because of its inability or its ability to say I am distinct from the object, and this I am is its being. This negativity of I am not you, I am not you, I am me. This is part of the essence of subjectivity. Um, but in terms of the object and understanding the object as distinct from the subject, this is something I sort of just presuppose in a weird Kantian way. Like I maybe took it out of this new edition as much, but the whole time I was like, yes, yes, there is Kantian finitude. I wanted to emphasize another level of finitude, which had to do with perspectival hierarchy. It had to do with the division of subjects from one another and not just the subject from the object. But I sort of just presuppose that there is an objective noumenal realm which we're separated from. So it is very Kantian in that respect. And I think overcoming Kant, you just need to understand the doctrine of the divine energies and just understanding the way we understand essence is distinct from energy as it relates to all things and all persons, not just God. We commune with other things actually through their energies, but that doesn't mean it's a complete communion. It doesn't mean that it's a communion free from um stuff on our side that clouds our vision. That's sin, that's self-relation, that's that whole realm of stuff that has to do with the fall. But yeah, I would sort of just presuppose Kantianism, but I do think there is a pretty easy way out of Kantianism using an understanding of the essence, the distinction between the essence and energies. No, we are not grasping the thing as it is in itself, but we are communing with, not just grasping, we are experiencing elements of the thing which uh which truly belong to that thing. We are experiencing its activities but not its essence.
Now, for Hegel, and I think when I see, I'm going to keep referencing the original because that's what I read. So
Sure.
if your views have changed, let me know. But I remember in the original copy you wrote something along the lines of the distinction between you and Hegel's sort of system of self-relating negativities. That for Hegel, there's this, I believe you refer to it as the cunning of reason, which is like this development of the subject through. And for
Mhm.
those who don't know, in the phenomenology, he talks about sense perception, understanding, reason. Um, I forget what the next one is.
Um,
Whatever,
yeah, there's like spirit, religion,
spirit,
there's yeah,
religion, and then
all this stuff.
eventually absolute knowing.
Mhm.
Uh, and now for you, well, you reject this because you don't think there's an end to this, right? But there is an end in orthodoxy. But if we just stick with the subject itself, there
Yeah.
is no
Yeah.
finality to this. If we just
I,
stick in this, do you still accept
yeah.
that, or is there?
I
Okay.
do. I think given the subject as it's understood by Zizek, it's more principally Zizek than Hegel, and the way Zizek understands the cunning of reason. Zizek says the cunning of reason is this tendency for essentially for the truth to win out. That is essentially what he said, and I think that you can reverse this cunning of reason. Still using the word cunning, but cunning in a more negative way. The fact that the subject always avoids truly grasping its truth. And I think Zizek already has this, and he calls it the death drive. He calls it, we have the object A, what we desire, and the death drive is not grasping the object A because it's ungraspable. The essence of the death drive is to constantly miss the object A. Now, fundamentally, what Zizek is saying in Less Than Nothing, yes, there are different manifestations of the object A, but when we get down to it, we are the object A. The self
Right.
is the object A. This is why Zizek is a Hegelian, because what we cannot grasp, well, he's a Hegelian and not a Hegelian, because ultimately the quest, what we're looking for, is the subject. We can never reconcile with ourselves. Hegel says we actually can reconcile with ourselves. We can know ourselves as, who knows? Like Antonio Wolf would say that there's probably like an ability to become united with God. Obviously, like God and a very personal God. There's other people who would say, no, Hegel doesn't believe in a God at all. He's just talking about a process. That's what Cadell says. I don't know what Hegel really says. I don't really care what Hegel says because I'm sort of tired of this Hegel idolatry. It's like Hegel was a cool guy. He did make mistakes. Like you can't imagine a guy not making mistakes, and he did make serious fundamental mistakes, which when you just think out, you can use Hegelian terminology. But still, once you actually get down to the the essence of it, Hegel was wrong, I think.
Right.
Yeah,
And yeah, sorry to interrupt you, but I think
no problem.
we can actually see Hegel is, and I think Hegel would be honest enough to accept this eventually, because you you kind of see when he opens up this path, and I'm not saying he is a logical positivist, but you can see why some of these logical positives might have been influenced by him because he has this holism, right? And
Hmm.
and um and I guess, I think, and this is I got this interpretation from Antonio Wolff regarding absolute knowing, which is like you don't know every fact, but you can explain all the principles behind what these facts are, which in some sense I kind of accept. But then you have later developments in the history of logic, such as Kurt Gödel, who says, well, actually there are things that logic can't explain. There are
Exactly.
incompleteness theorems and axioms can't explain themselves, and there are actual problems. And I think even Florensky, because you did a video about Florensky, and something like he gave this
He
sort of
says the exact
proposition.
same thing.
Yeah,
Same
yeah, he
thing.
says yeah, exactly. And so I don't think Hegel saw that, um, and I think he missed that. I think like Gödel kind of put a nail in that coffin in that respect.
Hmm.
And yeah, in regards to Hegel, is like I like Hegel, but the whole interpretation stuff, it's a little tedious for someone who's just getting into him as well, because it's like, well, who do I go to understand this guy? I don't want to get the
Hmm.
wrong interpretation here, but yeah, and then so we kind of cover, yeah, there's no, I mean, you would still accept the development, right, of the subject. You would just say that this, like, once this development is over, it doesn't really like lead to something spectacular. Just kind of just now there's just like this ongoing negation that doesn't go anywhere past this, but it's still this never-ending self-negation, right? That's
Yeah.
still trapped in. Okay.
Well, that's what the subject, when you get to Zizek's subject specifically, when you get to the void of self-relating negativity, what we are, he says, is self-relating negativity. I don't think Hegel says that. Like the because if you're going to get to the point of religion and analyzing whole societies and analyze and saying that this is all spirit, like to a certain extent, it's like how do you know that if all you are is the individual subject? How are you speaking about, like when he talks about absolute knowing, he talks about a plurality of spirits, right? They're all different spirits, but they're united in God. But it's like, who is God? How are you speaking from the position of God? How did you get to multiple spirits when all you have is a subject? Like fundamentally, I think Zizek getting stuck at what Hegel calls the understanding, getting stuck at the self-relating negativity, at the pure I. This is a fundamentally a good move, I think, because I don't think Hegel actually gets around it. I don't know how we can be talking about all of a plurality of subjects across time in all of history, talking about the whole development of spirit, when all you've really proven, like, I don't see how we've gotten past the one individual subject of self-relating negativity. That's Zizek's whole point. We have the subject divided from the other. We have the subject divided even from itself. We have the impossibility of self-knowledge, impossibility of intersubjectivity. And because of that, there's the impossibility of absolute knowing, of reconciling with oneself and knowing who you are. Because what you are in Zizek's model is just a negation. And you can't just reconcile with negativity. That's not something you can ever do. If all you are is pure negativity, there there is no ability for you to be brought to some sort of reconciliation, which totalizes this and brings it into harmony. That's just not how negativity works.
Right, it would be almost impossible to give any real substantial predication if it is just negativity.
Yeah,
Because
there it's impossible.
because in order to give predication to an ontology, you would need to have this identity over time, and
Hmm.
if you have this, you would have a whole it collapse in and of itself. Now, also, I remember you made this distinction as well, and this I got tripped up on this for a while, but then and I think a lot of people do as well, but I think you actually hit on something really interesting here. This inability to have a communion between subjects. Um, I think you put a very important emphasis on that this is not solipsism. It's not just that, I don't know you exist. Like, well, I accept your existence, but I cannot understand your existence as you understand your existence because of the perspectival hierarchy issue. Is that
Hmm.
correct? And I think
Yeah.
this is also kind of like what Sartre talks about, how this communication between subjects, like, yes, we can understand each other, but we don't really actually understand each other how we understand ourselves in a way.
Yeah.
So, like, when two subjects are communicating, like, I have an idea of what I mean, but your understanding of what I mean will never be identical to my understanding. Now, this is
Yeah.
also a given. Like, no two understandings can be identical because of, if you really want to get crazy with it, you can go to Leibniz and say, well, no two ontologies can be the same because of the law of indiscernibles. If they were the same, they would be one.
Hmm.
Um, so I think that's very interesting. It's like, so it's not merely just an issue of like, oh well, I don't know what your experience is like. It's more so, even if I accept you as this subject and we presuppose that, I still don't know you. Like, I don't know
Yeah.
what you're communicating. Yeah, there's a
And
barrier.
that's the difficult thing. It's like, who are you? What is it that I don't know about you? And like in a certain sense, within the understanding of the subject that's passed down from Western philosophy, culminating in German idealism, well, actually probably culminating in Zizek, but meeting its highest point in German idealism, we see the subject, the Kantian subject, divided from the outside world. It's like, okay, but what about the subject as a subject, not as a representation, right, of the outside world, but the subject meeting another subject. So a
Right.
person meeting another person. The division isn't like, we don't say that, we don't reduce you to something that you to to we don't say the person you are experiencing. What the subject does, the subject itself does not reduce that other unto just representational content. Like, there is a sense in which you do that when you experience the other, but fundamentally, at an even deeper level, what I'm divided from is not merely the object, which the subject is, but the subject as a subject, as an I. I not only cannot know that I, but I cannot even grant that that I is equally an I, because an I is irreducible. It is singular, and singular is universal and particular in one. That's what it means to be singular. It means that your own individuality is absolute. It's universal. I cannot be one, I cannot be a little bit of my I and a little bit of your I. That doesn't work at all. What I am is fundamentally separate from you, and not only separate, it has to be higher, because if I were lower, that would mean that I would be from a perspective where I could totalize myself as just one particular. But because the point from which any totalization could occur is my own self, I cannot include myself into the picture. So I cannot include you as higher than me. You have to be within the picture as well. And that's what the subject does. It reduces the other to a partial subject. And what I call this mediation perspectival or perspectival hierarchy. And this is something I think is relatively may even be unique to me. I don't know if anyone else has really gotten down to the essence of it and made the distinction between Kantian finitude and perspectival hierarchy. So I think it's very important because now we're getting into elements of pride, where this is when we start to see Christianity or the possible appeal of Christianity, because Christianity, it doesn't just say we're divided from the other, but it says that we have an active role in this. There is an active expulsion of the other. That's what perspectival hierarchy says. This is why I even say you can apply perspectival hierarchy to your own self, because insofar as yourself, in the past, right, in your own concrete content, right, insofar as that is distinct from you as I, right, your past self is distinct from your present self, it's an other. And if you're hating otherness, if you're not communing with otherness, you will expel that otherness out from outside of you, out of your universality. You will negate it. This is what Pavel Florensky himself says. He says that the non-I, that he says that I hates every non-I because it is an other to it. Pavel Florensky already figured it out, because when you think consistently within an Orthodox communal ontology, you realize that the expulsion of the other is necessary for any form of self-relation, of any form of subjectivity understood as self-relation. It's always an attempt, a movement towards grasp or towards self-relating, which occurs through an active expulsion of the other. There is no substance to self-relation. There is only a movement away from the other, an attempt to self-relate, which always ultimately fails. Like, just to go back to the object A, what Zizek is saying is the object A is ourselves, because you're always trying to reconcile with yourself, but you never can. You never can just be who you are. You always have to be moving to something else. And we see that at every level of existence, we see it in our concrete actions, and we see it at the level of subjectivity itself. So this inability to reconcile with oneself is a fundamental structure of reality, and I think that it has to do with the fallenness of the world. I think Christianity provides the most coherent account of why we see all of these paradoxes and all of these limitations wherever we go.
Now, object A in relation to the subject is what we would call the form of the subject, and it
Yes.
would in this sense it would be object A because it's the object of desire because the subject is desiring to grasp itself as the form, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay.
And what Zizek says and what Lacan says, for one, the object A is almost not even a real thing. It's not a real thing. Like, it's not something I could grasp and just have. Because for Zizek, all it is self-relating negativity. He says what it is the very failure to self-relate. That is object A. So what it is, its substance, how it persists in the world, is as the very act of failing, as the very failure to grasp the object A. This very failure, this death drive, it it constitutes the subject. It constitutes what we are ourselves. So this is how we get. This is from this view of subjectivity. We move outwards to the broader world of psychoanalysis, and we say, oh, yeah, our desire, the object we desire, is unattainable, right? And we can just move out on and on and on, and we can say we never can reconcile with anything. There's all these antinomies. For Zizek, this all fundamentally has to do with, it boils down to the subject. It's because the subject fundamentally is a contradictory entity. For us, we would say that no, the subject is fundamentally fallen, which clouds every perspective it has. But through communion with God, every single aspect of ourselves in the world, as we relate to it, is divinized and brought into proper um, relation with itself.
Yeah, and this is interesting. So that's like where he would draw influence from Lacan about like this desire to understand and grasp the form, like the form itself is this ideal that is constantly unattainable, which is the encounter, I guess you would say, with the Lacanian real,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
And now, for some reason, a lot of people have a hard time defining this, but it's actually really simple to understand if you use an example of what it is. Like, if you want to use an example, like let's say there's a band you really like, and you have this idea that the performance is going to be great, and then you kind of it's this ideal. It's what your ideal is actually when your ideal kind of gets negated once you come into contact with reality. But every time you try to conceive of this real, it's not actually the real. It's the very act of conception of it makes it an abstract idea, which is not what the real is.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why it's nearly impossible to grasp. And in the case of the subject, that's also why it's nearly impossible to grasp as well. But that combined with the fact of self-relating negativity.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
now,
like
yeah,
the real, like as you said, basically you got it right. Like the real is that which cannot be put within the symbolic order, that which cannot be put into language and brought within some sort of referential totality, which just means placing it amongst other things in reference to other things. The object A, the self, is always outside of the realm of things. It can't be put into reference with other things because it is the fundamental reference point from which everything is a referent.
exactly, yeah, yeah, that makes perfect sense. And um, going back to this, what was it? Oh yeah, so with Hegel, you made an interesting point earlier that there's a lot of people who there's like an idolatry of Hegel, right?
Mm.
And this kind of made me realize something regarding Hegel is that I think Hegel is he has a lot of insights, but I think a lot of his insights aren't necessarily as novel as a lot of people make them out to be. Because when I was thinking of one of these sort of logical exercises he does, to me he is kind of doing what I call philosophical long division. So, for example, he has this idea of necessity turned into contingency turned into necessity, and one could use the example of like event A happens in a certain way. You kick I don't know, rock one hits rock two, and then you have uh, effect three. Now, for that series of events to happen in that specific way, it needs to be those exact rocks happening in that way for it to be that specific event. Well, what Hegel just described here is a law of identity in a more elongated way. Um, so that was something that I was kind of like, oh, well, Hegel, he's a smart guy for sure. There's no doubt about that. But it seems like he's looking at things that people already know or that has already been discovered in the history of philosophy from a different perspective, which isn't necessarily to put him down, but it is something that I think people have to understand when going into that. I don't know if you would agree with that assessment or not, but
Yeah, and I think I would. I think for the most part, I think Hegel definitely had novel contributions. But the thing I would say is like I don't know if we can necessarily say that's a fault of Hegel because for a lot of what he does, he is going through a history of something, showing imminently where and why it failed, and then you can only really ascribe to what Hegel believed in in the absolute sections, right? In the absolute sections, this is where we're ending to. This is where the process is going. So Hegel's someone you can't quote mine and you can't, but like I definitely agree with you nonetheless that he's took
yeah.
stuff from the history of philosophy. He said stuff which probably has already been said. And I do think he just made some core mistakes which led him to certain conclusions. And that doesn't mean he's not a genius or anything.
Yeah, it definitely. I think I don't necessarily think that comes from Hegel himself. This idea of him being completely novel is probably a lot of the people who idealize Hegel
Hmm.
that say that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah. So I mean, I've hounded you for about an hour. Well, I don't know if it's been an hour, but for a while now with a lot of questions regarding this book. If you have anything you wanted to ask, feel free. I don't want to be the guy who's always hounding you with questions here.
Well, I'm just wondering when you're gonna be back making, or like, are you planning on making consistent videos? Because I know, like, I don't know what you're planning on doing, like, in the
Yeah.
next few years or whatever. But for me, it's like I'm working on videos and I'm working my actual job, and hopefully I'll get to a point where I'm actually making enough money from whatever I'm doing online and with philosophy and stuff, where I don't have to work.
Yeah, so basically my plan right now is like if you look at like my upload pattern, I guess you could say it's about like every 2 weeks there's something that's coming
Hmm.
out. And a large part of the reason was because I was reading texts and then taking notes and then reading those notes into long form video, which
Mm,
that's a project that takes a little bit because of the reading and then the notes and making sure you get everything right and then doing extra research to see if there's
for
anything you
sure.
should add. So those videos themselves take a while. What I think I'm gonna start doing is I might start switching my content over to more, uh, and I did say this in the past, and I haven't done it as much because I need to get better at speaking off the cuff. But I'm gonna start doing more off the cuff stuff.
Yeah,
Um,
I think
just
you should.
because that's just gonna allow me to produce more stuff, which is gonna inevitably increase traffic towards the channel.
That's the
And
problem. It's like it just takes too long to do video essays all the time and to do the detailed stuff that you like to do. I think it's probably be best if you just did off the cuff stuff and even started live streaming.
Yeah, that's what I might do. I might do live streaming, and then I could also just kind of, like I kind of realized not too long ago that, I read. I don't necessarily have to read the whole entire. I will read the whole entire book, but I don't need to put it in like one massive video. I could
No,
also just.
not at
I
all.
could. I can also just go over sections like you did, like you're doing currently with Heidegger. I don't know if you still
Yeah.
doing that, right?
Well, I'm still
And,
doing that. It's going very slow. But like what I'll do on my channel is literally take small ideas and put like even like that's why Byung Chul Han was so perfect for me because no one had made content before that was really good on Han. I did on all of these relatively obscure books that were small and it didn't take me that long. But even now it's like reading a whole book and writing down everything I want for that book. It's like I'm just gonna chop it up, focus on main ideas but if you want to do like what I think you want to do is like more longer stuff, getting into the details, like that's why I just need to live stream and do off the cuff stuff.
yeah, that's probably what I'll end up doing. And I was kind of doing something similar with elite theory books. And that's not
Mm,
necessarily philosophy. It's more so like, I guess, political sociology. And well, those are fun to read because they're not like too heavily complex. Like right now, I'm reading Spinoza, which I'll probably do a video on too. But
nice.
and I was actually thinking of doing, uh, you have this the whole series of with Heidegger. I was gonna try and do one on Husserl, which I know
Mm.
it's gonna be quite a
It'll
challenge,
be
but
hard.
I think it'll be
Yeah.
fun. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm gonna do it on logical investigations, which I think that's like his magnum opus. But I'm gonna answer the rest of your question
Sure. Yeah.
about what the long term plan is. So first of all, yeah, it's gonna be more. I'm gonna try and increase content so that way we increase traffic, get more of a sizable audience. Now, a lot of what blew up my channel was some of these high profile interviews that I did.
Yeah.
Um, I kind of, that was fun. I don't really know who else to go for at the moment. Uh, a lot of the people that I would want to speak to are dead, so that can't
Yeah.
really happen. I want to talk to Chris Langan, so maybe I'll give, yeah, I'll try and reach out to him for that. Um, but besides that, I think yeah, I'll do more off the cuff stuff. Um, Stuff that's not necessarily hard to edit. I have an editor, and that's kind of it. That takes a little bit of time to work out. So I think what I'll probably do is I'll just do maybe one video essay a month or something, and then just do more off the cuff stuff a couple times a week or like once a week during the month. So that way
Nice.
we have just a good flow going on, and yeah, I mean that's pretty much it for now in regards to money monetization. Well, monetization for my channel, that's a bit because of the nature of some of the videos, it's a little
Yeah.
hard and
And you've
unreliable.
already got those like 3 copyright strikes
Yeah,
that
there's a
I
guy.
warned you about.
There's a guy in my on one of my videos that I did on Robert Michelle's, and he's been hounding me for months because I use his color footage, and I don't know how he found me. He found me like the day of,
Right. Right.
which is pretty impressive, and
It's because YouTube gave a notification to him.
oh, that's what it is.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Well, I told him Sam Hyde is my it's like the guy who.
Did he just give up yet?
Well, he stopped for like 4 months, and then like a month ago, I got
He's back?
another. Yeah, he's back, and he's like, I think it is time for you to remove the content from your video, and
Like, bro, no, come on. Just
I'm like,
share.
look, yeah, I'm like, first of all, look, I get you put a lot of work into that video, and I understand it's important, but I think what I'm doing is a little bit more important because I'm not trying to be egotistical, but it's a little bit of a different project, and
Yeah.
I'm happy to give people credit. That's not an issue for me.
Hmm.
But yeah, I want to focus a channel like in terms of philosophy. I've actually gotten more like I started out, because I'm sure some of the people who watch my channel know me from going on posting as my Instagram page. I
Yep.
mean, that's how I met you and everybody else. And probably wouldn't have this channel if I didn't have that Instagram page, to be honest.
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah. That's how you met Dugan too.
yeah, that's how I met Dugan. And and I stopped posting there because this is the new project. So for anyone
Hmm.
who's that project is done, I'll still do videos on going on, but I mean, I kind of covered what I think is important stuff. But like
And when I'm
I've moved.
sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
No, actually, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, like, for the new project, like I think a lot of it should be about philosophy, but also from like a based perspective, because like for me, I got to be careful about what I say. And like, but we know, like everyone knows. For me, it's sort of like, right? It's like if you've been
Yeah.
close with me, if you but like I do literally, and like I am scared of getting canceled to like some extent. I'm trying to, and that's why I'm trying to create more independent foundations, to the point where like I can run my own. I have my own fan base. I have my own I have my own networking. I have my own like people who are support and infrastructure that's my own. Because I don't want to have to rely on other people. But especially for you, it's like there's a high demand in right wing circles for philosophy. Heidegger, Husserl, the political philosophers, even, and theology as well, like bringing theology into it all. And
Yeah.
I think that that is a market where like someone who I knew who had really good success in this was Trudil Tom, right? Like that's what he did. And he didn't pursue it, and that's fine. But like you can see what he did. He had an audience and people who are looking, for that type of content. So I think for you, focusing in on philosophy and also just speaking freely about politics, doing political stuff, and trying to make the connections there. Like that's why I was saying we could do that video with Jared Taylor um on this thesis that the rootlessness of modern white life is leading to embracing stuff like transgenderism and stuff like that. Like I think that's a genuine idea which has merit to it, which can be defended philosophically. Like you can use Heidegger's views on the necessity of having some sort of tradition grounding your identity. Like
Right.
this is what we've been lost, and this is what the consequences of it. So like what my suggestion for you, because I'm going philosophy to theology, you could focus more on philosophy to politics, because I know you're interested in that as well. So it's like do real philosophy, right? Like that's what I'm doing. It's like we're not compromising, but at the same time, we're meeting a sort of demand, which is found in, for me, theology, and for you, more political stuff. And that's why for you, like that's why I sort of use you to um talk about this type of stuff. And my political stuff, I can go through you and have you, because you're sort of like you've made a little bubble for yourself, which I like. But for me, I'm open and got all of these leftist Zizekian fans saying you just got to be careful. Like I don't hate them, obviously. I appreciate them and like them, but like I don't agree with you, right?
Yeah, it's hard. It's difficult because it's like, because I know from going on posting, there's a lot of people who really like the stuff that I did on there. And
Yeah,
when I had made like some comments about Islam or something, uh, they get very upset with me. They get like I had pissed off a lot of people on there.
yeah,
Uh, and I understand that feeling. It's just like, oh man, if I post this, am I gonna get like 50 people messaging me about this? Do I want to deal with that right now? Um, but it's even more intense when it's someone you speak to, like when you're like,
yeah,
cause you speak like we're speaking right now. You speak to a lot of people, so it's like you could say anything behind the words or whatever. Like when it's someone you got to deal with
yeah.
on a conversational basis, it's a pain.
It
Um,
is. And like there's certain ideas that people have that it's like just having these ideas makes you bad. And it makes it like there is no conversation to be had. You're just wrong.
right.
That is testimony to the success of our culture right now. But when like in Christianity, there are times in Christendom where like just having certain ideas, it was just like, no, you're not going to speak publicly about that. And there are ideas like that now. So it's like, even if you agree with those ideas, like let's not be retarded and let's like acknowledge the fact that this is the situation right now. Like you cannot go out and say certain things about historical events and say certain things about the nature of our civilizations and different groups and stuff like that. That it's just off limits. So like whether you agree with that or not, it's like that's up to you. But it's just like acknowledge that that's there. And I'm gonna say that like I have to just be careful because of these restrictions there with what I can say. You do to a certain extent as well, but it's like it's sort of different for
Yeah,
you. And I'm going towards a certain goal and I have a certain idea in mind, which will in the long run, I think will be
it'll create the
effective
basis for the yeah.
for everything. Yeah. Like that's just what we don't have enough clout yet, and we don't have enough infrastructure yet to actually do anything independently. But that's like really the goal. to create, or to create something like that, which we can rely on and be more and more honest about where we stand and what we believe, and actually providing philosophical, intellectual defenses for what we're saying, because what we're saying is not just trolling, it's not just joking, it's like there is a real reason why we believe this stuff. It's just like we have to be careful. The whole um what we have to break down is a certain view of the world which is linked together like a behemoth, and you attack one head, like attack one of Hydra's heads to grow back. It's like you say, well, this is the case, but like for example, um there are certain differences between groups, but it's actually because of oppression. Boom. Like now you have to go to that. And then it goes like this. But what about this historical event? What about this? What about this? What about this? What about this person? And it's like all connected. So it's like got to take our time and slowly infiltrate at certain particular places. It's like I am going in philosophy, showing a different way of doing things and a different idea. You're going to do it in somewhere else, and we're all just going to slowly build up the clout, build up the infrastructure, and build up the reputation to the point where we can speak on this stuff more honestly and more effectively. So that's really all I have to say about that.
Yeah, I agree, and I had a lot of people say to me, well, aren't you afraid that you won't get a job or something? Well, I say, my response is like, well, the jobs that wouldn't hire me because of what I do, like I wouldn't want those jobs in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I wouldn't want to be around those people, even if we weren't like, politics aside, ideas aside, the nature of the way those people just, for lack of a better term, just their vibe is just not for me. So that's okay for me. Like this channel provides, if that does ever happen, well, it helps me get rid of that junk that I won't have to deal with it. So I'm not necessarily afraid of that. And also I think there needs to be a human element to this stuff. There needs
Mm-hmm.
to be someone who can talk to as just like when I talk to people on here, I just want to I try to make myself be perceived as just a guy who's you know presenting ideas to you. I have my own ideas obviously, and I think people kind of know what I'm about.
Yeah.
But you know,
And it's like we're normal human beings when it comes down to it. Like we don't want to have people on and just make people mad. And like we don't want to
yeah.
have unproductive conversations with people, but it's like we also don't want to compromise on our beliefs. And it's like I would be more willing to just go toe to toe and debate stuff. Like there are certain things which I would just be completely fine with debating in public if I knew that people were going to actually sit down rationally, have this conversation, and not try to dox me and not trying to ruin my reputation or whatever. Like some things you just got to keep to yourself, and you have to have the discernment to know when to talk about it. So like there are things I really want to talk about, and perhaps will one day, but it's like not now. That's not the
Yeah,
move right now. So
exactly. And I know we got to wrap this up soon, right? But
yeah,
I did.
ideally.
Yeah, just one more thing I wanted to, because
Sure.
I think this is sort of related, and this will be quick. In one of your recent videos on Byung-Chul Han, I think it was the oh, what was it called? Your last one on him about the expulsion of the other. I think that's what something like that. Uh, it's something very interesting because he was talking about neoliberalism and like this one idea that I liked. Well, okay, I gotta be careful how I phrase this now because people people are gonna might misunderstand what I'm saying here.
Yeah.
But when he spoke about terrorism, he was talking about how like this is an attempt of an affirmation of otherness, which the subject in the neoliberal society is trying to do, right?
Yeah.
And I guess like, would you say the reason for that is because of its singularity? It's just it's a it's an attempt at otherness because it's trying to disrupt the sameness of the system. Because
Right. Right.
obviously, you can't have a system function if there's something antithetical to it.
The
Um,
death is the opposite, but also I think the truth, the real of neoliberalism. Neoliberalism is based on violence, exclusion, and death. Fundamentally, this is what you need for any worldview. Any political system relies on violence, exclusion, and death. But this is suppressed and repressed into the system so that we can have violence, exclusion, and death, and not just violence and exclusion in some stupid neoliberal way of understanding it. It's not like we're violence exclusion against trannies. It's like I guess so, but also not true, because like what type of violence and exclusion are we talking about here? When I say violence and exclusion, I really mean violence and exclusion. I don't mean like certain traditional ways of talking. I mean literally like we're going to put you in jail, like what they did to a certain historian. We're going to put you in jail before you've even been sentenced for what is it, a year and a half in Austria, in a tiny little box. That happened to a certain historian who I'm not going to name, but it's like, you're going to be removed from every social media platform right now. We're all going to do it together. Like that's what happened to Andrew Tate. It's like that's a coordinated attempt to silence someone. And then like, who did they do it the most to? In recent history, Donald Trump. Obviously, it's obvious what they're doing. It's obvious who is. It's not even about good guy and bad guy. It's about who's in power and who isn't. Who is coming from outside of the system. That was Donald Trump. Like I don't care if like he wasn't part of a larger conspiracy to subvert us, because if he were, it would have been done in a different way. He hasn't been
Yeah.
effective. He hasn't been effective, obviously. Like there's still like he didn't do what he was intending to do, but like that's what it's like. So, anyways, it's like terrorism, for example, is just bursting into a life based on repetition, the perception of normality, breaking through all that and saying, look what you've caused. We're doing this because of your violence, exclusion, and death, which you don't get to see. Suburban people, people in North America, you don't really see, but here we are. This is what you've been doing to us. That's what terrorism does, and I think that's why it's such a um, it's a symptom of neoliberalism.
Yeah, and I guess this will be my final point here. Something I really found interesting about that video was his idea of like this, neoliberalism has this fake hospitality, which is,
Yeah.
all are welcome, but you're all welcome so long as you're all the same. Actually, Dugan talks about this all the time.
Mm.
Um, and it's this fake hospitality, whereas I think it was like a real like quote unquote Kantian hospitality would be like this idea of um, you're all welcome as you are, like come as you are. Your individuality, your distinctions are perfectly fine. We're not going to make you conform to whatever hegemon we want. But this is the very interesting thing about neoliberalism, and what I think made it so successful is this idea that oh, we're all accepting, but implicit in that is we're all accepting so long as you conform to this standard.
Yeah.
It doesn't. It's very subtle, and I thought it's so effective. It appeals to this, because everybody wants to. There's some truth to be said. That there's something good about being. You know, I think you should have a love toward mankind, and
Hmm.
neoliberalism understands this, but utilizes it as a weapon, as all good um, authoritarians do. They know how to appeal to the masses in a way that's going to help expand their power. And that was also, if anybody goes and watches my last video, one of like my main arguments against democracy is the fact that it easily can lead to totalitarianism in that sense.
Yeah.
But with that, I mean, I think, yeah, we'll wrap it up now. I don't want to keep it for too long. That was a great conversation. I'm happy to have you back on. And yeah, if there's anything else you want to say, let me know.
That's it. No, I just say that thank you for having me on, and I think it was a good conversation. I'm just for anyone who's still watching, like I'm planning on changing my channel. Like this is really just the beginning. Different stuff are coming, better stuff is coming. I have a new mic coming. I'm gonna start being more ambitious with everything, starting a podcast. Obviously, I have my book. Love the links to I'll put well, because I'm uploading this because of the terrible
Yeah.
Wi-Fi. I'll put everything in the description. So yeah, it'll be everything will be there. Um, but yeah, that's all I have to say.
Yeah. And then in regards to Discord, yeah, there is like we have a Discord community too that
Yeah.
is very fun to participate in, and everyone, you're welcome to come there. It's a great place. It's for the exchange of ideas. So yeah.
Yes, for sure. Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Perfect.